I love horror stories. Scratch that. I love really good horror stories. The kind of horror stories that don't rely on cheap jump scares or shoddy writing. The kind of stories that just sends a shiver down your spine and leaves you with that terrible feeling of dread at what you just witnessed. And today's story we're going to be covering is not only spine-tingling, but very dreadful to think about. A story that asks the question, what if your dreams didn't feel like they lasted for an instant, but felt like they lasted forever? The Long Dream by Junji Ito. Welcome one and all, it is your boy Axecept, and today welcome to the inaugural episode to what I hope to be a long-running series. It came from the shelf. The idea for the show is that I will be covering and analyzing stories that are not only disturbing, but either horrifying or disgusting, or somewhere in between that spectrum. And I thought there was no better place to start for this series of videos than with one of my favorite, if not my most favorite, horror mangakas slash authors of all time, Junji Ito. Now, I'm not going to be doing a deep dive on the man himself. Normally, I would like to do history type lessons on who is writing the story and like kind of what their background is, just to kind of give newbies who have no idea who he is some background. But I'm going to give you a basic rundown of who this guy is and how he came to prominence. Basically, long story short, Junji Ito was drawing ever since he was a kid. And right around the time, around 1989, I believe, when he was still working as a dental technician, he was actually writing short stories for manga to submit to local magazines. And one of the first mangas he ever submitted and then published into magazines for a weekly series was the series Tomie. And no, I'm not going to cover this on this channel just yet. This is a rabbit hole in and of itself. I mean, look at how big this thing is. The series would eventually become so popular with readers that it actually turned into a serialized series and even got a notable mention from the Kazuo Umezu Prize, which, by the way, is a big honor considering the fact that Kazuo Umezu is actually one of Junji Ito's biggest manga inspirations of all time. Now, while I do think Tomie is one of his most notable works he's ever worked on, mainly because it was one of the first he actually worked on and published. In fact, his earlier works, you could actually tell the difference between his early works and his older or more recent works, considering the fact that the art changes are so wildly different, even from this own series, from the ending chapters to the beginning chapters. But ultimately, I wouldn't say Tomie is the most notable or the one that cemented him on the map. In my opinion, the manga that actually put him in a global light, the one that made the name Junji Ito stand out amongst all manga enthusiasts, it would have to be Uzumaki, without a doubt. And no, I'm not covering this story either in this video, obviously, because again, it's a pretty big book. Maybe I'll cover it later on as the series goes on. Regardless, it is one of his most popular works, and I totally understand why. I mean, if you've seen images like this or that, you get it. He would also release a series later on down the road called Gyo, which is actually the first time I ever heard of Junji Ito, as this series was actually advertised in one of Viz's mangas that I bought back in the day. I remember thinking, wow, that looks actually kind of interesting. Like fish that walk around on land, that seems kind of interesting. But it wasn't until years later when I went to a Barnes and Noble that I actually checked it out and saw that it was on the shelf. And I bought it, and I've been hooked with Junji Ito ever since. Let's circle back around though for a second, because while I do really enjoy those 3 series that I just mentioned, I do feel his bigger works tend to overshadow the much shorter stories that he's written over the years. In fact, I think, in my opinion, that some of his best work he's ever written were his short stories that he has released over the years. And yes, I understand how inflammatory that might sound to some people. That's not to detract from his bigger works. In fact, I do think his bigger works like Uzumaki, Dio, and even Tomie are excellent in their own right. But I do feel that Junji Ito is at his absolute best when he's constrained to the short story format, because it really forces the man to really think long and hard about how he's going to spook you within 30 to 20 pages of a story, maybe even less than that. You know, presenting an idea that seems very mundane, and then eventually just building up the tension until eventually ripping the band-aid off and just leaving the audience going, oh my god, what the hell? What the hell did I just read? Oh my god, what the fuck? I think he excels at that very well. I mean, his short stories, in my opinion, are an embodiment of what makes Junji Ito, and what kind of stories that he writes. And without further ado, we are going to cover, in my opinion, one of my favorite short stories that he's ever written, The Long Dream. But before we get into it, let's talk about our sponsor for this video. This guy! It's come to my attention that over nearly 90% of people that watch my content on YouTube aren't even subscribed to the channel. So I just have one thing to say to you people. You hurt my feelings. I hope you're proud of yourself. Okay, all jokes aside, if you're one of those 90%ers that haven't subscribed to the channel yet, but you've watched my content before, or you're just one of those repeat offender viewers of my videos, but you just never have thought to hit the subscribe button for whatever reason, even though you watch my videos, every release I make a video, sub button's down there, buddy. Just giving you a hand. So yeah, if you like the video and you want to see more, hit subscribe, ring the bell, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment down below. Well, that's it for this sponsorship ad time for the video. But before I go, I just want to say this. I hope your day is well, and thank you for watching. Let's get back to the video. All right, the moment you've all been waiting for. Junji Ito's The Long Dream. Here we go. The story opens to a woman lying in a bed at a hospital at night, speaking about her fears regarding her eventual death. A single panel showing a dark hallway with a silhouetted figure in the distance. The woman crying out loud her woes about not wanting to die. A noise catches her attention, drawing her gaze to the door to her room. The silhouetted figure peering through the window of the door. Uneasy, she asks who is there as the figure opens the door to the room. Before cutting away to the outside of the hospital, the woman letting out a shriek to whatever it is that she saw, with the title card reading, The Long Dream. It is now daytime and the doctors are attending to the same woman we saw 2 pages ago. Still in hysterics, the doctors assure the woman that they are doing the best they can to help fight her condition and tell her that they haven't given up hope on her and she shouldn't either. The lady continuously crying in despair, pleading to the doctors to save her from the condition as she wants to desperately live. For the record, it's not clearly disclosed as to what condition this woman has, It's never really explained. It could be cancer that's terminal. It could be some other disease that we're just not aware of. In fact, funny enough, in the author commentary for this story in the book Shiver, actually, where is it? In the author commentary, there's actually a section where Junji Ito shows off some of his sketches as well as his notes that he wrote down. And I guess originally the idea was that she was supposed to have cancer, but maybe he thought that explaining that would have been unnecessary. And, you know, what's scarier than the fear of the unknown? So he clearly just decided to not even mention it at all. However, the doctors seem convinced that they could actually cure her of her ailment, whatever it is. But this could just be hollow reassurance. We're just not quite clear. However, despite their affirmations to help her, she is more than certain that her time is nearly up, as last night she saw him, to which she refers to him as the god of death. The doctor, however, refutes this claim, actually saying that the man that she saw last night was merely a patient from another ward of the hospital. The woman fires back like a howitzer, though, calling the man not of this world, and his face was not just terrifying, but inhuman. Someone who lived beyond the darkness, as she puts it. Sometime later, the two doctors are speaking about what she said, remarking that because of her heightened awareness of her illness and her fear of death, that it has sharpened her instincts and that she was on the money. The main doctor discussing how worrisome it is that this patient they were talking about is wandering around at night, and that it's probably the result of his fear to sleep that is causing him to do this. The other doctor inquiring how the patient is doing, the head doctor saying he should be awake soon enough. It's from this point that one of the two doctors inquires about this patient, as he's not too familiar with this case, as he's brand new to the hospital. To which the main doctor, who we learn is named Dr. Kuroda, obliges to inform him about this patient, narrating to the doctor as well as us, the reader. Kuroda says that the patient's name is Tetsuro Mukoda, a young, gaunt-looking man who looks like he hasn't slept a day in his life, who has been staying at the hospital for about 2 months. The reason as to why he came to the hospital for help was because, as he described, that he's been having long dreams. Kuroda asks the man how long he feels that they last for, Tetsuro telling the doctor that these started about a month ago, and that every dream felt like they were going on for at least 2 to 3 days. Kuroda believes he means that whenever he sleeps, that his sleep would last a while, to which Tetsuro corrects him, saying that it isn't his sleep that is getting longer, but it's his dreams that drag on. Tetsuro recounting that every time he went to sleep, his dreams became longer and longer. The reason he's concerned by this is that not every dream he has had is pleasant, which he wouldn't have minded if they weren't complete and total nightmares that got stranger and scarier the more he slept. Curious, the doctor asks him how long his dreams are at the moment, to which Tetsuro responds, every night about a year. Of course, Kuroda is doubtful about his claims, but Tetsuro affirms that he is indeed telling the truth, his long dreams severely impairing his daily life, not being able to remember things he did the day previously, as if he's trying to recall memories from a year prior. Kuroda still wasn't sure if he was telling the truth, though, as of course to anyone such a claim would seem so far-fetched to anyone to believe, going so far as to wonder if he was just having mental health issues that made him believe a delusion. However, being the good doctor that he is, he decides to take Tetsuro in for a sleep study to observe his sleeping patterns. And during his sleep, he starts to have massive convulsions, his eyes darting around frantically, but just as soon as they started, they cease. It was at this moment that Kuroda decided to pull the plug and wake him up, worried about his well-being. Tetsuro does manage to wake up. However, he asks Kuroda where he is, Kuroda informing him that he's in a hospital. It takes Tetsuro a moment, but eventually he does indeed remember that he did check himself into a hospital, and then he says something that sends a shiver up Kuroda's spine. That he had a dream, and it lasted for a year and a half. It's at this moment that finally Dr. Kuroda believes Tetsuro's claims. He's completely baffled by this as he continues to do these sleep experiments. He notices the same patterns, massive convulsions of the body before going away and falling into a deep sleep, something that on the outside that seems like a moment in time, but for him feels like an eternity. However, these sleep studies aren't really giving Kuroda any answers on how to properly cure him of his ailment. We then see Kuroda talking to Tetsuro, assuring him that he's doing the best that they can to figure out a suitable treatment, and that all he requires is his patience. However, this of course doesn't give Tetsuro the warm and fuzzies inside, as every day he goes to sleep, his dreams are just getting longer and longer, his last dream lasting for 10 years. Of course, Kuroda continues to reassure him by telling him that his dreams are just an illusion and that he has nothing to worry about. But of course, this doesn't make him feel any better, simply remarking to Kuroda that it's easy for him to say that as he's not having to deal with these horrible dreams that he is having. Tetsuro then starts to describe some of the dreams he would have, such as being trapped in the jungle as a soldier constantly on the run from the enemy combatants that lasted for 10 years. The night before, having a dream that lasted 9 years, where he was pulling all-nighters to cram for endless exams, and even having a dream where for 8 years, he was doing nothing but endlessly looking for a toilet that simply didn't exist. And yeah, I know how all that sounds. It sounds pretty ridiculous and mundane, but as someone famously posited, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So while it may not seem that bad on the outside looking in practice it probably feels more like torture. It reminds me of the Greek myth of Sisyphus, where he would just endlessly for all eternity roll the boulder up the hill all the way to the top, and right as he gets to the top, the boulder just rolls down on the other side of the hill, and he has to go back down to roll the boulder back up the hill because that's part of the god's punishment for him. It sounds like torture is what I'm trying to get at. Kuroda, despite hearing this, just repeats what he said in an attempt to assure him that he's in good hands, to which Tetsuro ominously says this, quote, "All right, doctor, but if you don't hurry, it won't be long until my dreams drag out to 100 to 200 years. Were that to happen, I can't say what would become of me," before leaving Kuroda's office. Kuroda, continuing with the sleep studies, does indeed notice that his dreams are getting longer and longer by the day, noting that after his 20th day of being in the hospital, after waking up, he would have such great strain just trying to even remember the events of the previous day. To him, it was as if 50 years had happened during the course of a night. After a month, he would start speaking in wildly different intonations, as if he was released from a time capsule from centuries in the past. When taking scans of his brain, the doctors noticed that he was indeed experiencing these great lengths of time, as if he was lost in a different time and dimension from our own. Now, back in the present, Kuroda is still speaking to the newbie doctor. He notes to him and us by proxy that things have gotten even worse for him. So bad that his body is physically changing, as if his body was going through an evolutionary process. It's here where we finally get to see what Tetsuro looks like in the present. Now, I'm going to warn all of you guys right now, if you don't want this story spoiled for you, and I highly recommend you read the story for yourself before proceeding on. If you haven't, go pick up the book Shiver. I definitely recommend it. It's 20 bucks. The story, The Long Dream, is in this collection. It also comes with a collection of other really good stories by Junji Ito, so I totally recommend it. Totally worth it, in my opinion. But yeah, if you haven't read it by now, go read it first. Hell, go online if you have to. I don't necessarily condone reading things for free online, but if you have the means to do it, then go for it. But if you don't want this story spoiled for you, and I'd recommend you don't spoil it for yourself, then here is your spoiler warning. Anyways, for those who are avoiding spoilers and for those who are sticking with me, well, you've all been warned, but thank you for watching anyway. Also, if you're leaving, kindly leave a like for this video. I really appreciate it. It would definitely help this channel a lot. And come back later to watch the video to hear what I have to say about the rest of the story. The doctors enter Tetsuro's room and Dr. Kuroda asks him if he is awake. And this, I warn you now, is what he looks like. So now we finally know what terrified Mommy so much. And to be fair, he does look like death. Not only does Tetsuro look wildly different than when he first came into the hospital at the beginning of the story, but like Mommy described, he indeed is looking more and more inhuman as the days go on. His cranium is enlarged, his hair is falling out, he's got cracks all over his head, his proportions look more and more exaggerated. And despite having plenty of rest, that look in his eyes paint a very, very different picture. I won't lie, the first time I laid eyes on this image, it really did unsettle me and sent a chill down my spine. And I think I know why. It's that he's got that uncanny valley look. It's like I'm staring into the uncanny valley. And it just makes me think about, what if I saw a person that looked exactly like that? It would just probably creep me out. And it really did. It creeped me out. And I'm pretty sure it creeps you out too, and that's the intended purpose, obviously. He's just so uncomfortable to look at overall. Tetsuro asks the doctors where he is and who the doctors are, seemingly not remembering anything that happened the night prior. Kuroda reminding him who he is and why he's there. And then for some reason, Tetsuro raises his hands out like this, and yells out with his arms outstretched like he's a dark wizard trying to cast a spell. It's pretty funny. I won't lie, it makes me laugh. Especially when the doctors look at each other in another panel in just complete befuddlement as to what he's doing. Although when you remember everything at this point, especially up to this point, it is quite sad, as clearly the longer the dreams have dragged on, it's clear that it has taken a toll on his sanity. Kuroda remarks that Tetsuro has been acting like this a lot more recently anytime he wakes up, as if he believes himself to still be dreaming. But then he asks the two something that alarms both of them. Where's Mommy? To remind you who Mommy is the female patient from the beginning of the story. You know, the one who is afraid of death. And if you also remember how the story started, a dark silhouetted figure entered her room the night prior, which caused her to freak out and believe that the god of death was coming for her. You put the pieces together, yeah, I think you get it. It was Tetsuro that showed up that night. Dr. Noob and Dr. Kuroda are both alarmed and confused, as Tetsuro seemingly believes that Mommy is his wife. In the business, we call this foreshadowing. He tells both the doctors that Mommy and him have been married for thousands of years and she never left his side up till now. He even goes as far as to accuse the doctors of keeping them apart for no reason at all. And it's at this point he bolts out of the room to look for Mommy, just running down the halls of the hospital, just looking for her frantically. I think you know where this is headed. The doctors obviously know this is bad news, because if he were to see Mommy, this could make things far worse for her condition. So they chase after him, but his love for mommy will not be stopped. He has been kept apart from mommy for far too long, and he won't let those evil doctors keep him apart from his wife. Obviously, he's in complete delusion at this point. He's so far gone in his mind that due to these long dreams that he can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy anymore. We then cut to a panel where a nurse is bringing food to Who's calling me? Oh, f off. It's a bot. We then cut to a panel where a nurse is bringing food to mommy. However, she's not in the mood to eat as she's still bemoaning her fear of death. Only for the screams of Tetsuro yelling, "Mommy!" trailing down the hallway up to her room, only for Tetsuro to burst through the door to her room like a screamer video in real life and standing in the doorway to her room like a ghoul. Guess what happened? Yeah, you guessed it. She flips her lid, she jumps out of her bed, crawling on the floor, screaming like a banshee that he's coming for me. Oh my god, it's the god of death himself, help. Like, she's just flipping her lid. Whereas Tetsuro is completely, as I established, in his own delusion, believes that she is his wife and that they are madly in love for each other. So when reality smacks him in the face like this, he's not sure what to make of it. From here, the doctors make it to her room and quickly escort him out of the room as his presence is making things far much worse than it already is. And what's really sad is that once he's escorted out, it seems as he is hurt. Not physically, but emotionally, as mommy's words calling him the god of death not only left him confused, but it hurt his feelings as well, because he has no idea what's going on. It's here that once escorted back to his room, the doctors explain everything to him, and he finally snaps back to reality, in which he says something pretty sad actually. Quote, "I see. So it was a dream. All those delightful years I spent with mommy were a dream. Currently, not only is she not my wife, mommy calls me the god of death." God, it's just so sad. I mean, really think about this. This whole situation is terrible, as Tetsuro is clearly a good guy who's just afflicted with an ailment that doctors don't know what to do with. He has nothing but complete nightmares that drag on for centuries, you know, wearing at his sanity day by day, even changing him physically over time, which is pretty bad. And the tragic thing is, the one good dream that he has that lasts for 1,000 of years is when he believes he's married to someone that loves and cares about him very much for thousands of years, who he was never married to in the first place. It's just so heart-wrenching. Like, you just feel so horrible for this guy. It's awful. It's sad. It makes me feel really, really bad for this guy because it's not his fault. You know, it's really terrible. After a moment of silence, Kuroda seemingly at a loss of what to say, Tetsuro posits a question that really puts things on edge. He asks a rhetorical question to Kuroda, afraid that at some point his dreams will go on for so long they might never end. And he asks Kuroda if he were to have an endless dream one night, what would happen to the man that wakes up from it? What will become of him? And well, we do get somewhat of an answer. Sometime after the event of Tetsuro bursting through mommy's room the second time, mommy is in complete hysterics, screaming out nothing but wishing not to die, flailing around in her bed, the doctors and nurses doing their best to calm her down, but to no avail. The doctors are of course concerned about her well-being, Kuroda saying that he's never seen a patient so terrified of their own mortality before. It's then that Dr. Yamauchi, yes, we finally get to know his name, asks Kuroda of the status of Tetsuro Mukoda. God, that is such a tongue twister. Kuroda just responding with, I can't even imagine how far into the future he's gone this time. It's then we see a panel of Kuroda opening the door to Tetsuro's room to show Yamauchi what has become of Tetsuro, to which we see this lovely image. Any shred of humanity that Tetsuro once had is now completely gone. He is no longer recognizable as the man he once was, let alone a human being. He looks completely alien at this point. His eyes completely wide open and bulbous, as if he was staring into the void for all eternity. He has truly become the Sisyphus of his own nightmares. We cut to later on that evening where Kuroda watches over Tetsuro for the entire night, just waiting for dawn. Kuroda thinking to himself whether this time he would even be able to wake up from an endless dream, wondering if an eternity within his dreams was real or nothing but an illusion. But then again, only one needs to look at him. The next morning we see that despite his efforts to pull an all-nighter to keep watch over Tetsuro, he indeed did succumb to his exhaustion. However, he does wake up from his sleep, only to find that Tetsuro's body is starting to crumble, turning into nothing but a pile of fragments and dust. Standing up from his chair, some wind coming through the window, blowing away some of the pieces of his leftover fragments, with Kuroda saying this. He left behind a weathered shell, and perhaps his consciousness set out on a journey toward the eternal dream. Inside the remains of the brain of the man who crumbled to dust, I discovered crystals of unknown material. I stared at this material thinking it might have some connection with his unique dreams. But no matter how long I stared into the microscope, I learned nothing. So yeah, even after all that, having something to study from the remains of Tetsuro's crumbled body, they were no closer to figuring out the truth behind the long dreams when they started. I mean, think about how frustrating that must be as a doctor. You get a man that comes into your hospital with a rare case you've never seen before, and you have no idea what to do. And when you finally are able to study the remains of the patient that has had this affliction, you still have nothing to answer for. You have no answers whatsoever. That must be entirely frustrating. Sometime later, we cut to a panel of Mommy lying on her bed, seemingly doing better. The nurses looking over her notice that she has been doing better recently. The other nurse thinking it must have been the tranquilizers, but finding it odd that considering they didn't work on her before. Odd. Mommy finally wakes up from her sleep with Dr. Kuroda standing over her, asking how she is feeling. She's saying she is feeling a lot better, however, finding it odd that she's been having long dreams. As if she has been living a whole month in a single night. Very peculiar. After that, Dr. Yamauchi asked Dr. Kuroda about Mami Takashima's condition. Kuroda informing him that, like Tetsuro before her, she has been having long dreams and are getting longer and longer. Yamauchi speculating that, like Tetsuro, she might to start exhibiting physical changes just like him. Yamauchi is highly concerned because he figures that if someone else in a different ward is now exhibiting the same symptoms like Tetsuro, he fears this might be contagious, which isn't a huge leap in logic considering Tetsuro did indeed have 2 instances of being in direct contact with one another. However, Kuroda swats down these speculations immediately and is then when the truth comes out. Remember those crystals that came from Tetsuro's brain? Turns out, Kuroda decided to administer these crystals to Mami without her consent. Of course, Yamauchi is completely flabbergasted at the revelation, demanding to know why he would do such a thing. To which Kuroda responds that he wanted to find out the true application of these crystals, and to do so, he needed a human test subject, and he thought Mami was the perfect person to conduct such an experiment. Yamauchi is enraged by this, as not only is it completely unethical to perform human testing on people without their consent or knowledge, it seems like complete mad scientist syndrome that is occurring with Kuroda. Like Kuroda is just trying to play God. And I'm not really far off, as while Yamauchi calls him out for this, Kuroda tries to rationalize his position, stating that Mami's major issue was her fearing of death. And if he was to induce the same symptoms of Mami so she could have endless dreams, she would theoretically be able to live on forever in her dreams. Even postulating that if he was to show the world that it's possible to induce endless dreams into dying patients, they wouldn't need to fear death ever again. Here's my one problem with this plan. If you remember, like Tetsuro, he had nothing but terrible nightmares that lasted for eternities, for lifetimes. This guy was literally having nothing but dreams that lasted on for centuries that would be nothing but waking hellscapes, things that nobody would want to experience. So for some reason, Kuroda, in his, smooth-brained mind, thought, well, if I give it to, Miss I Don't Want to Die, oh, she'll be able to live forever and she won't fear death. Well, she probably won't fear death, but you know what she will fear? Completely being in hell.
You know what's not cool, Bobby? Hell.
Because that's pretty much what you're doing, Kuroda. That's a terrible, just a horrible thing to do. Yamauchi is completely in the right for being super pissed off by this. Of course, this does not go over well with Yamauchi because, mad scientist and all that. And yeah, I know he's a doctor, shut up. Yamauchi telling him it's complete madness, rhetorically asking him if he's so willing to desecrate the souls of the dying. And Kuroda doesn't really have an answer for him. It's hard to discern in this moment whether Yamauchi's words got to him and is making him have self-doubt as to whether he's right in what he's doing, or whether he's just silently confident in his decisions and believes Yamauchi is wrong and just being overly emotional. It's a Schrodinger's cat situation. He might be regretful, he might not be, but one thing's for sure, we will never know. We then end on a final panel, that of Mami in her bed, starting to exhibit symptoms of physical change as cracks start to form on her forehead, with her eyes wide open and blankly staring into the void, resting in an endless dream. And that is the end of Junji Ito's The Long Dream. And boy, I have some things to say. I love this story so much. Hell, here's the thing. I would even be willing to concede that this isn't necessarily his magnum opus. Like, it's not the best thing he's ever written. I could concede to that. May not even be the scariest to most people, and that's totally reasonable as well. But if there's one reason I think I have thought about this story more than other stories that he's ever written, I think it's for this one simple reason. The fear of death. Let me explain. Now, this may not have been the intention from Junji Ito, but I did notice a running theme throughout this story that I just noticed the multiple times I've read this story. It's the fear of the unknown. Not even just the fear of the unknown, but the fear of death. I mean, let's really think about this. I mean, you have Mami who's afraid of death, and then when she encounters Tetsuro, even calls him the god of death, something she is morbidly afraid of. But then you have Tetsuro, who has a very similar issue to Mami, although maybe not for the exact same reason. Like Mami, even he fears what will become of him the longer and longer his dreams start to drag on for. Like a deathly illness, the longer his dreams became, the more warped his mind and his body became as a result. He, like Mami and her fear of death, he fears what would happen when he has an endless dream and what would become of him as a result. And when he finally does have an endless dream, he crumbles into nothing but fragments and dust. And what do both death and an endless dream both have in common in this context of the story? Simple. The unknown. Like Tetsuro's endless dreams, we do not know what happens to us after we die and leave this mortal plane. Like Tetsuro's endless dreams and, say, comparative to a terminal illness like terminal cancer, there are plenty of people like him that walk around life living a totally normal and healthy life until one day they're diagnosed with a terminal illness that causes them to reflect on their own mortality and fear the unknown finality that we call death. Like Tetsuro's endless dreams, we don't know what happens after we die. When we finally leave this mortal plane, we have no idea what happens. And that thought alone is very scary to a lot of people. And usually we don't think about our mortality until right around we acknowledge and know that we're going to die. Take terminal cancer, for example. There are plenty of people like Tetsuro who live their life normally and there's nothing wrong with them health-wise, and then next thing they know, they contract a deadly illness that cripples them in their daily life, which causes them to be afraid of the unknown finality and finally acknowledge the fact that they're going to die. And that is a very scary prospect to a lot of people. In a sense, in some weird way, Tetsuro, I feel, is the embodiment of death. And despite all the progress we've made in medical science and technology, death is still the unknown frontier that eludes all of us from actually having an answer. And similar to how Dr. Kuroda, moments after discovering Tetsuro's shattered, crumbled remains of Tetsuro's brain, looking into the microscope, staring at the crystals in vain for an answer lying within them, like us wondering what happens to us when we die, Kuroda is no closer to an answer on the mystery of the long dreams than when he started at the beginning of the story. Now, I know what some people are going to say, bro, you're just giving Junji Ito way too much credit, and I assure you I'm not. In fact, it's the complete opposite. Hell, even in the book Shiver, which, by the way, if you're interested in reading the story that this came from, if you haven't already, Shiver is where the long dream story comes from, at least in the US. So I would definitely recommend picking it up. It's about 20 bucks off of Amazon. In the post-author commentary after the story is over, he does mention that back in the day when he was a child, he had a conversation with his sister where he talked about the kind of ideas that kind of led to what became the short story that he wrote in high school, which eventually became the short story that I read to you. Well, I didn't read to you, but I summarized for you people, which eventually became the story that I just talked about. However, he didn't really go into any like themes for the story or what kind of message or intent he wanted to impart onto the reader. And personally, I do think that is by design when it comes to Junji Ito and his works. After all, I think a story, especially a horror story, is at its best when you don't really have an answer to what happened in said story. And I think Junji Ito understands that a lot. So how fun would it be if he explained the meaning and the reasonings for why he wrote the story or what message he wanted to impart into it? I don't think that's his intent for the story. I think his intent for the stories is to scare the audience. And I think he understands this very well. I personally think it's unfair when people criticize Junji Ito for writing his stories in such a way to be super deep and to get people to ask him what it means and all this other stuff. Like he's trying to outthink the room and be super duper smart. When in reality, I think that's more people projecting their ideologies and their own life experiences onto the story, and they, you know, seeing things in it based on their own personal experiences, but for some reason are trying to interpret that as Junji Ito trying to impart a message onto the audience and somehow reading it as pretentious. I don't understand that, in my personal opinion, because I don't really think that's his intent to begin with. I think his intent is to scare you guys. And that's not to say that I don't think Junji Ito doesn't insert his own personal social commentary on things that happen in the world or society or the human condition. I don't think that's true at all. I do think he actually does, but he does it in such a subtle way that really at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, his goal is very, very simple. He's not trying to impart a message onto the reader. He's not trying to get you to necessarily think super deep. That's not really his intent. His intent as a writer, as a horror author, is one simple thing: to horrify you. And Junji Ito is very perfectly aware of this fact. I mean, after all, what is the fun of a horror story if the author has to give you answers? At the end of the day, horror stories are meant to horrify you. And there's nothing less scary and horrifying than having all the answers. And with that, that is the end of this video. And if you managed to make it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. I really appreciate you. I really do. And if you did make it to the end of this video, then please consider leaving a subscription to this channel down below. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you can get notified for when a new video comes out in the near future, as well as hit the like button. It helps with the algorithm, helps get these videos into people's recommendation feeds and the search feed and all that kind of stuff. And seriously, I want to try to get this to grow. Like come on, guys, let's get this channel to 1,000 subscribers, and then after 1,000, let's get it to 5,000. Let's keep going. Let's get this channel to grow. Like, if you really like this video and you want to see more, let me know down below. In fact, if you have any suggestions for other stories, whether it be Junji Ito stories, or whether it be other horror authors or anything like that, let me know. I would be interested to check them out. I want to start off small with more smaller short stories before I get into the longer ones, because, you know, I want, you know, it's going to take some time if I do the bigger ones right away. So I kind of want to work my way up before I go balls deep. But seriously, let me know down below if you have any suggestions or if you have any ideas for how this series can be improved or whatever. Just let me know. I would love to hear from you guys. And with that, thank you guys for watching. I'm your boy Axecept. Again, here's another reminder to hit the like button, and I will see you guys on the flip side. I'm your boy Axecept, and thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Keep it real. Peace.